and welcome to Big Island Discoveries, the show where we discover the people, places, businesses, and things that make Hawaii Island the special place that it is. Today, we're going to be visiting the Pacific Tsunami Museum. We're going to be meeting with Professor Roth, and he's going to talk to us about tsunamis, about the museums, and things that we should know to protect ourselves in the future. So come on with me and let's go take a look. Hey, aloha, Walt.
Morning, Mitch.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Yeah, come on in.
All right. Well, thank you for having us here today. And, you know, this building has actually survived a tsunami, I understand.
It survived more than one tsunami. It survived several, including two very deadly ones, 1946 and 1960.
And what was this building originally?
It was a bank. It started off as Bishop and then changed its name over the years.
And now it's owned by Tsunami Museum.
Yes, they donated it to us.
So you said that, you know, this building has survived a couple of tsunamis. How many tsunamis have we had in modern times in Hawaii Island?
Well, since written history began, we know about ones in 1837, 1867, 68. The list goes on and on. On the average, about one every 7 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we're about, what, 60 years out, 65 years out since the last big one?
We are 65 years since the last deadly tsunami struck the islands, the one in 1960 from Chile.
And, you know, so we talked about 7 years. We have a tsunami roughly every 7 years. What's the time frame between the deadly tsunamis, generally?
Well,
averaged out.
There is no average.
Okay.
There really isn't, because you can have the 1960 from Chile, 1964 in Alaska. Wasn't deadly here in Hawaii, but it killed, over 130 people.
When we think about the deadly tsunamis here in Hawaii, I think 1960 and then 1940, 46.
But also, in the 1800s, we had several.
You know, and I know tsunamis don't just happen in Hawaii, they happen all around the world. And, one of the things I know that you've been looking at is what happens, the lessons we learn from those tsunamis. Any big lessons that, people should be thinking about?
Well, they should definitely realize it's not if, but when. There will definitely be another tsunami. And they need to learn that tsunamis aren't a single wave. They're a series of waves that can last for hours. And any of those waves can be the biggest depending on where you are.
And I know, one of the things that's interesting, a lot of people think that first wave that comes in is the tsunami. And like you said, it's not, just one wave, it's several waves. What is generally the time interval between like the first wave and the second wave and the third wave? And
generally, it's 15 to 20 minutes, depending on where they're coming from.
And when we think about the 1960 tsunami, was the first wave the biggest wave, or?
No, the third wave was the largest.
Wow.
So, and in 1946, the third wave was the largest in Hilo. But the seventh was the largest on the island of Hawaii.
Wow.
All depends on particular location.
And in both of those tsunamis, there was like a 15-minute interval between the two?
About 15 minutes in 46 from the Aleutian Islands, about closer to 20 minutes, the one from Chile in 1960.
So I'm guessing one of the things that happens during tsunamis is people see that first wave, or they hear about the first wave, and they want to be looky-loos, and they go to see what they can see.
Yeah, they think that, that was a big one, and there'll also be fish stranded. So a lot of people rush out to get free fish, not realizing that the next wave may well be much larger.
And that ends up in people actually losing their lives, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. No doubt at all.
God, that's pretty scary to think about. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Tsunami Museum. I understand that you're actually one of the founders of the museum. Can you talk about why this museum was founded? And we'll start there.
You want the whole story?
Just you know.
Okay. So I originally didn't do tsunami studies research. I actually studied climate change, but I taught a night class for veterans because I'm one, and I taught the science of tsunamis one night, and then we had a dinner break, and they started telling their stories about surviving in the 46 or the 1960s. And I asked them, has anybody ever reported these? These are important. No. I thought, well, these need to be written down. So I started interviewing various survivors and wrote my first tsunami book about that. And in the back of the book, it said, if you have a story you're willing to share, please contact me. And I had my contact information. And a lady named Jeannie Johnston, who had been a 6-year-old who ran from the tsunami in 46 out of Keokaha, contacted me. She actually moved over here, and as we decided we needed to start a museum to preserve these stories and to educate people so that in the future people didn't need to die if they understood more about tsunamis.
So let me ask you this. What year was it that this museum actually opened? And is this the original location?
It's not the original location. We first officially opened in up in the old Hilo shopping center in a small space up there. And this is our 30th anniversary.
Congratulations.
Right now. And fish 1994, I think we were up there, and then we were lucky enough to be given this building.
You know, I know a lot of great organizations have mission statements. I understand that the Tsunami Museum actually has a mission statement as well. Can you tell me what the mission statement is?
Well, our mission statement is to never forget those lost, to preserve their stories, and then to use them to educate people so this doesn't happen again.
That's great. You know, so really, there's a whole bunch of reasons why this museum is important, not just to tell the stories, but it's also to make sure that people don't make the same mistakes that they've made in the past.
Absolutely. And we don't want people to be scared. We want them to be prepared.
So if I'm just someone off the streets, why would I want to come to the Tsunami Museum?
Well, first, to learn about tsunamis.
Okay.
You know, and we have visitors from around the world, and some of them live, you know, in Kansas, for example, where they don't have tsunamis. But we asked them, you ever been to the beach? And of course they have. Well, every coastal line around the world has had a tsunami at some point in its history, and some repeatedly. So they need to understand, you know, how to be prepared. And also the stories are really remarkable. They're you know, truth is stranger than fiction in many ways. And some of these stories are just totally amazing.
I agree. You know, having looked around, you know, tsunamis don't just happen in Hawaii, of course. They happen around the world. And I think we're learning a lot of different things. I think about, you know, the tsunami that we had in Japan. What are some of the things, some of the lessons, what are some of the lessons we've learned from some of these tsunamis that have happened in other places that maybe we need to be thinking about here in Hawaii?
Well, in Japan, they're one of the areas most frequently impacted by tsunamis. They sit on 4 different tectonic plates that crash into each other, and those are what generate many of the largest tsunamis, the earthquakes from those. And they're probably among the most prepared and disciplined people on the planet, yet they still suffer loss of life and continue to learn. For example, there was a school that was miles away from the ocean, and they evacuated to what they thought was a safe place, not realizing that tsunamis come up rivers and streams, and they were close to a river. It killed 82 students and teachers. Whereas another school, the kids evacuated, they were close to the ocean, evacuated, and then there was an aftershock that caused boulders to go rolling down. So they evacuated further, and the villagers saw them and followed them. and the area where they'd stopped before was destroyed.
Wow.
So they not only saved their lives, but that of many of the villagers, because they had the good sense, the instincts to keep evacuating.
You know, one of the things I saw as I looked at some of these tsunamis and kind of studying this is we think about people losing their lives because they drowned in the tsunami. But that's actually not really what happens, is what I understand.
Well, you know, after the first wave comes in, and it's always a series of multiple waves, it picks up debris and sucks it out. So the next wave is full of battering rams, really all kinds of debris, houses, cars, you know, huge containers, because those are in harbors right next to the ocean.
Right.
And so many people die because of blunt force trauma, or they're hit by something and then they drown because they lose consciousness or can't swim.
The things we learned was from the Samoan tsunami and Department of Health. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, in 2009, there was the South Pacific tsunami, which occurred so close to American Samoa and independent Samoa. There was no time for an official warning to go out. But fortunately, in the schools in American Samoa, they'd had tsunami training the week before. And the kids instantly responded. And in many cases, they would go into the villages and ring the bell and tell people to evacuate. One of the mistakes that was made was that there were so many people that had injuries from the debris, and then the medical professionals were overwhelmed, so they would stitch these up as fast as they could to go to the next patient, not realizing that the water was filled with sludge and sewage. Everything that sinks down to the bottom, it's stirred up after the first wave and washed in. And they had to open hundreds of wounds due to massive cellulitis infections.
Wow.
If they'd only known ahead of time, they could have spent just a few more seconds cleansing the wounds. Not had to do that. And also, they spoke about the first responders that had no training. They didn't know what to expect. And when they dig through debris and you find children's bodies, it's not easy even if you're prepared, but when you're not prepared, and if they suffered from horrible PTSD, couldn't sleep for months, still have nightmares.
Very scary. I know when I was mayor, we did a lot of tabletop exercises and things like that. But as I speak to you, I'm thinking about, what things that we could have and still can, improve on, our first responders, our lifeguards, training the people a little bit better, working closer with our schools and things like that. One of the things I think we have also talked about was fires that break out. And a lot of people don't think about fires breaking out from a tsunami. I mean, you have water. How do the fires break out?
Yeah, and this happens in pretty much every tsunami. We've been really lucky here, but in Alaska and in Samoa and American Samoa. So imagine where ships for isolated communities are going to unload fuel. They can't send it by train. So like us in Hawaii, the fuel tanks are down next to the harbors. When the tsunami comes in, it picks up debris, smashes into the fuel tanks. The fuel, being lighter than the water, goes on top. Hits a utility pole where there's sparks flying and catches on fire. And then when Alaska in '64, it took them over 3 days to put out the fires because the roads were destroyed too. So even when you had fire trucks in safe places, they couldn't get to the areas where the fires were coming. So you need to think ahead and be prepared for those kinds of events.
Tell me a little bit, does the Tsunami Museum work with kids in any way?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of our biggest missions is outreach to kids. We have special school programs, and we also have go out and give presentations. So this last week we had schools from Quebec, Canada, high schoolers who came in, but then we also had a bunch of fourth graders from another school. And then I gave a talk at the Kona Public Library for not young people or kids, but people more our age. But so, we do as much outreach as we can to the community. We wish we were actually capable of doing more. If we had, better funding, we'd be able to do more outreach. And we need it. Everybody who lives in Hawaii and everyone who visits needs to understand about to be prepared, not be scared. And it's not going to scare away visitors.
Right.
If I let them know, we want you to understand this because we care about your safety. In the unlikely event this happens while you're here, we want you to be safe.
Sure. Why is this museum so important to this community?
Well, Hilo is one of the most tsunami-prone areas anywhere in the world. I mean, we do sit on an island, a group of islands that are kind of in the bullseye of the Pacific Ring of Fire, where big earthquakes occur, which generate tsunamis, which cross the entire Pacific. But also, Hilo Bay and the bathymetry, the underwater topography offshore, are such that tsunamis tend to be really big here.
And just thinking about the tsunamis that have happened here, maybe talk about in Hilo, what have we learned about this area where we're sitting, and maybe the resilience and that this museum can tell us stories about.
Well, the people of our community are tough, and after 1946, sadly, they rebuilt a lot of areas. But after the 1960 tsunami, which impacted downtown, but also area which wasn't heavily impacted in 46, and more over toward Banyan Drive and where the White Oak Park is now, those areas were turned into parks and soccer fields. And really, it was a win-win for the community because we have all these wonderful recreational areas. World Canoe Championships are held here every few years. And those are the areas that are most heavily impacted. And there should be no loss of life as long as people evacuate from those areas. No one's living it.
And why is this museum so important to you, Dr. Walt Duffy?
Oh, well, the museum has the world's largest collection of survivor interviews, but I've done over 300 of them myself. And when you talk to a survivor who's lost friends, it's hard. They've lost family members. They never get over it, especially parents who've lost children who've lost their parents. And when you know that if they'd only known what to do, if they'd been educated, then it didn't have to happen. So that's really our mission. It became my calling to do whatever I could to see that we make the community become safe through educating. And one of the most powerful ways to educate people is with true stories of members of our own community who were survivors.
And I know that you have a vault, and in that vault, there's not just the interviews that you've done, there's quite a few hundred more interviews that are there.
We have my co-founder, Jeannie Johnson, did her master's thesis doing interviews, collected lots of those. And but we have them from all the major tsunami events around the world that have occurred where there were still survivors. We've interviewed people, I interviewed people who survived the 1923 tsunami. But we went to Alaska and interviewed dozens of people all around Alaska and the communities who were heavily impacted. After the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, we went to not only Indonesia, but to Thailand, Sri Lanka, India, and the Maldives, all areas that were heavily impacted, and all of which are very different cultures and terrains, because we can always learn something. And if you're going to train people around the world, you need to know how different communities respond.
And I know inside the museum here, there's actually stories from different places in the world. I'm looking at the Japan section and that tsunami. I think a lot of people remember that very vividly,
Yeah.
Seeing all the things on YouTube. The museum also has a website, though, that people can get information. What is the website address, if you know?
Well, if you just type Pacific Tsunami Museum into a search, it pops up.
Okay, that's fair enough. Easiest way to figure it out. So, one of the things I learned while I was in the county as the mayor, that, tsunamis get generated in different places, Chile, Alaska, but they also get generated here. And is there things that people should know, especially for preparing themselves for a locally generated tsunami versus one that happens in Alaska, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the warning system, the way it works, and I can give you more detail about that later, it's able to pick up earthquakes right after, within minutes. And if the tsunami is coming from Chile, we may have 15 hours before it reaches Hawaii, or from Alaska up to 5 hours, or Japan 8 hours, which is time for them to determine if there has been a tsunami generated by the earthquake, and if so, if it's potentially going to be just little wiggles, or if it's going to be potentially deadly and destructive, and then to get warnings out. But for a locally generated event, there is simply not time for that. In 1975, we had a big earthquake, 7.4 off of Kalapana. They had less than 2 minutes on that entire coast before the tsunami waves arrived. Right. They arrived in Hilo in 15 minutes. We're out in the end of Keaukaha in less than 10 minutes. And that's still not time for the warning system to be able to determine where it is, how big it was, did it generate a tsunami, and then get a warning message out. So people need to know how to respond to distant ones when the sirens go off or they get a message on their phone or over their television or radio. They need to know to have a plan where to evacuate to. Yeah. And have a go bag. The important things. If you live in a tsunami zone, you don't want to leave your important papers, birth certificates, and all those things, and passports. You want to have those in a spot where you can just grab it and go. For a locally generated event, you need to be able to detect nature's warning signs of a tsunami, because that'll be your first warning, really. So if you feel the earthquake and you're at the ocean, as soon as the earth stops shaking, let that be your warning. As soon as you can get up, go. Evacuate to higher ground and inland. If you don't feel an earthquake, but the ocean behaves strangely, if the water sucks out for no reason, or comes in, or you hear a loud noise from out at sea, or bubbles start coming up from the sand, all of those are signs that there's potentially a tsunami coming. And you don't want to wait around to see it. You want to immediately evacuate.
Yeah, as you say that, it reminds me that we talk a lot about the 1946 tsunami, the 1960 tsunami, that 75 tsunami. We actually lost lives, we lost a bunch of scouts through that.
When the earthquake struck and sent in a tsunami, which struck in some places up to over 40 feet. And sadly, this scoutmaster, Dr. Mitchell, was washed over a cliff and killed. Mm. And a fisherman from Keau, who was ridden down on horseback, was never found. He was sucked out to sea. Mm. So yeah, and if people had immediately evacuated when they first felt the earthquake, that wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have lost those lives.
And again, that's the importance of having education, and this museum educates people. I know you got some great displays and things. Can we go take a look?
Absolutely. Let's go learn some about the science and the history of tsunamis here.
All right.
Okay, so tell me about this room that we're in here.
Well, this part of the museum explains the science of tsunamis and how the warning system works and how we study tsunamis from the past.
One of the things I remember is when we're looking at tsunamis, we look at the ocean buoys. How does that work?
Okay, these buoys, which are called DART buoys for Deep Ocean Assessment and Reporting of Tsunamis, are placed in the deep ocean so they can pick up the energy of a passing tsunami wave. The ones near shore, we used to rely on tide gauges. Mm-hmm. Problem is, all harbors are different, and the waves can be really big in one and really small in another one, whereas these are in the middle of the ocean in deep water. They measure the pure energy of the tsunami, which is the most important factor to determine whether it's going to be huge and deadly and destructive or not. And so this is the sensor that sits on the seafloor. It's the very first one, the prototype that was used to test the system, to make it work. And then there's a buoy at the surface. So this will be down, 5,000 meters, 3-4 miles on the ocean floor. And overhead, after there's an earthquake, a tsunami wave will pass. And in the deep ocean, they're not very tall, but the amount of energy in them, because they have huge wavelengths, is enormous.
So it's not really measuring the up and down, it's measuring how much energy it's taking.
Yeah, and it measures the up and down, and it can tell that from wind waves.
Right.
Because wind waves have a very different frequency and shape. So it picks up that signal, and then it sends it up a signal through the water to a buoy at the surface, and then up to a satellite and down to the warning centers.
So that will be in a distant, generated tsunami. And a local tsunami, we don't have that luxury.
No, and we do have one buoy off the west coast of this island. By the time a tsunami gets there, it's already hit shore.
So why do we have that buoy then?
Well, that's for other parts of the Pacific.
Oh, I
It's not
see.
just
Okay.
us,
So these buoys, how far across? They're all the way across the Pacific. Or are they every?
Well, they're spread out all around, off the coast in areas that have tsunamis. Sadly, there were, so they're on the coast of South America, North America, around to Japan. There used to be some in the Indian Ocean. There are just a few left because pirates stole the batteries out of the ones off Indonesia. Sadly. But Australia still has some, so they're buoys down in this part of the Pacific.
And I'm looking at this, and I know this is something big for us when we're in civil defense. It gives the different hours. Can you maybe just talk a little bit about the hours that those rings represent?
Sure. So the speed of a tsunami wave is determined by the depth of the water. So in the deep ocean, they're going 500 miles an hour or more, the speed of a jet plane, basically. And then as they get shallower water, they slow down. So like I say, they're only maybe be this high. But when the wave in front begins to slow down, the wave behind is still going faster. So all that water in between, and they may be 100 miles between waves, begins to catch up. So that's when the waves really build up. Ships crossing in the deep ocean may not even notice this enough. Then may come ashore and be, 30 or 40 feet high.
All right, well, tell me about this parking meter here.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, tsunami is not just water. It's filled with debris after the first wave. And you can look at all these parking meters that were leveled by the 1960 tsunami all across town.
Wow. And these are made out of metal.
These are very strong, metal pipes.
That's pretty amazing to think that, it's that much power and that's coming through, and you got other things that are moving through. And I think you told me most people don't drown; they die from blunt force trauma.
As far as we know, because it's been difficult to get figures because they bury people very quickly after most tsunami events.
So I know in recent history that the museum is now only opened a couple of days. How is the museum funded?
Well, in the past, we've been funded by a combination of admittance fees and donations. And fortunately, some members of the community realized the real importance of teaching people about tsunamis. And we're very kind and generous. Sadly, our building, which we're very lucky to have, is almost 100 years old and is suffering some major maintenance issues. And that's costing us, we were always a nonprofit very close to the line because we wanted to charge as little as possible so we could educate more people. And we're free for Kamahina the first Saturday of every month. But sadly, with all the maintenance issues, we've had to close down, and we have just 2 days a week, 4 hours each, Saturday and Sunday, with all volunteers.
I know in the past, KTA, Barry Taniguchi was one of your big supporters. I understand now the Olson Trust has stepped in and given some money, but
Thank goodness.
This is really important for our community to tell this story, to remind people that we have to be prepared for the future. And then a lot of the families that still live here have stories that are part of Hilo's history and part of this museum.
And not a year goes by that we don't have someone come in who has a story. Just a couple of years ago, a young man, he'd been a young man in 1946. He'd never come to the museum. He'd been home on leave from the Army. His grandmother lived down in Waipio. And he rushed down and found her house washed up the river. And they said they found her shaken, but okay. And he gave us photographs, which we never had, of Waipio and all the people who'd fled up the sides of the valley and the homes being destroyed.
Yeah, I think
remarkable.
one of the things people don't realize how much donations, what a big difference that they make. So, well, how can people donate to the Tsunami Museum?
Well, they can become members,
Okay.
which gives them, free admission. They can become corporate members, which means we're more than happy to share the fact that they donated money to the museum to help save our history and save lives. And there's special scientific membership for scientists. So there are different levels of ways that you can help.
That's great. And this is the only tsunami museum in the state of Hawaii. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Boy, what a treasure we have right here in Hilo. Thank you so much, Walt, for showing us around. It's been a real pleasure. And for you, I hope you come out and visit us here at the Tsunami Museum. Great things to learn, history, future planning, everything. Just a fascinating place. Bring the kids.